Money. Yep, it's on our minds. Sometimes it's on our minds a bit too much. That's why we brought in Rabbi Binyamin Babad, who spearheads Relief, a fantastic organization, which you'll hear more about them. But money and mental health are very, very closely linked together, right? Poor mental health can make earning a living extremely difficult, and we wanted to get into that. So, without further ado, another episode brought to you by Living Lchaim, sponsored. This episode is sponsored by FAO Printing. You'll hear more about them in the middle of this episode. But without further ado, Rabbi Binyamin Babad. Being a Jew, awesome. Managing personal finances, not so awesome. Welcome to Kosher Money. Okay, another episode of Kosher Money. We're going through these like water, and today, super excited about this particular topic, mental health. I think we've come a long way in over the years about the stigma. Still ways to go. Rabbi Babad, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Relief. I know you've been a big part of that for quite a few years. For those that don't know, what is Relief?
Okay. So Relief is a mental health referral service. Probably the easiest way to describe it, most people know about Echo or Shuki Berman in terms of what they do for medical referrals. We do the same thing for mental health. When somebody's looking for a mental health professional, it's actually very, very difficult to find on your own, maybe even impossible to find on your own the right person, because very often people don't speak about what their issues are. So if somebody's looking for a cardiologist, you could ask your brother-in-law, but if you're looking for a psychiatrist or a therapist, you might not want to ask your brother-in-law.
Because of that stigma associated with it.
Right. But even if that wasn't an issue, what people often don't realize is that just like medicine has specialties and subspecialties, and you wouldn't go to a kidney specialist if you needed an orthopedist, mental health has the same thing. Just people don't realize it. People say, what's the difference between one therapist and another therapist? What's the difference between one psychiatrist and another psychiatrist? And really nothing could be further from the truth. So even if stigma wasn't the issue, and you were willing to speak to somebody, the chances that they would know what you need are very, very slim.
Are those differences publicized? Meaning, if you walk up to a door, you would not be able to necessarily see that this is a specific psychiatrist, right?
It would say, John Brown, psychiatrist,
okay.
Or psychotherapist. So that's number one. Number two, also knowing who's good is a big issue. Not everybody, in fact, really the majority, are not really that good, and nobody knows that because who's watching? So Relief is watching. What we do is we interview the clinicians, and then when we make recommendations, we follow up. We follow up with the people that we've recommended and see how they're doing. And at this point, Relief has helped almost 125,000 individuals.
Wow.
And we're adding 1,000 new a month.
1,000. So that's 1,000 new phone calls coming or contacts coming in.
Individuals coming in a month into the system. So that's a lot of information. We're speaking on the average month. We're speaking to at least 1,000 new people and at least 1,000 people from the past, and everything gets put into a database where we keep the track of how the clinicians are doing. When you do that a few thousand times, you get to see data, and you get to see patterns, and you can see that this clinician is doing a very good job and this clinician is doing less good, or this clinician has done good with this group but not so well with this group, and trying to figure out why it works for these people and why it didn't work for this people. That's how we can tweak the system.
So you're getting so how do you follow up with someone who calls in to know whether or not that psychiatrist was a good fit and they got the help they were looking for?
So we'll often call them. There's a schedule of when we're going to call somebody. We'll call the way the system was built. It doesn't always work that way because of the volume that we're dealing with. We're dealing with such high volume. But the way the system was built is that somebody should get a follow-up call after about a month, 3 months, 6 months, and a year, to see how they're doing, not just at the beginning, if they actually went and followed the advice, but see how they're doing over time. And again, when you do that as often as we are doing it, you get a lot of information.
So how does it work? So someone finds out about Relief. Are you doing heavy advertising, or it's mostly word of mouth? So
we haven't advertised in many, many years because, as I said, over 1,000 people a month. If we had advertised, I'm afraid what it would be. So a lot of it is word of mouth. But the truth is, we get a lot of free advertising. I don't think you can pick up a magazine, whether it's a Mishpacha or Ami or whatever it is, that there's some kind of article that mentions Relief. So we got a lot of free publicity.
I mean, you're on the Kosher Money podcast.
There we go.
listened to by at least dozens of people. So what does that look like? Someone calls in, and who's picking up the phone? A psychiatrist, or it's
no? We are not mental health professionals. It's by design. it would sound funny, but really a mental health professional kind of gets in the way of what we're supposed to do. We're not here to fix the problem. We're here to help identify the problem and figure out, without being in the way, who is the best person out there to do a proper evaluation and come up with a treatment plan. So when somebody calls, they can either schedule online an intake, or they get set up, the secretary sets up an intake for them, and we do a phone intake with one of the referral specialists. We spend probably the most time and effort on symptoms, understanding when the person is describing it, and often somebody will call up and say, my wife has whatever. And we'll ask them, was your wife properly diagnosed? Or again, this is a self-diagnosis because you read it in a magazine.
So they'll say, hey, my wife has OCD or something.
So we'll ask, is there a diagnosis of OCD or is this a self-diagnosis?
Okay.
And if it's a self-diagnosis, we'll say, instead of giving her a diagnosis, why don't you just tell me what's going on? Tell me what are the symptoms? What are you seeing?
Are there a lot of self-diagnoses running around?
Yeah, a lot of people like to self-diagnose, again, based on little information that they have.
Right.
So really understanding what's going on, and then, although again, because we're not clinicians, we will not diagnose anybody, but we may diagnose them in our heads.
Okay.
And then we'll say, that you should therefore see, based on the symptoms that you're describing, you should go see such and such a person. They are expert at this. And then we'll follow up with them to see how they're doing. Very often, we may send somebody to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, okay, this is what you need to do. We also need therapy. And they'll call us back for the therapist. Or the other way around. We may send them to a therapist. The therapist says, well, this person really needs a psychiatrist.
And a psychiatrist, for the listening audience, that's someone who can dole out medication.
Right. Psychiatrist is an MD and can give medication, whereas either a psychologist or a social worker does therapy.
So the person answering the phone can potentially, after hearing the symptoms, decipher which track to put that caller into.
Exactly.
Okay.
And again, we've done this because we've done this so many times. We really get a good sense of what's going on, and generally we will always err on the side of caution. If somebody is not functioning, because therapy takes time. Therapy is not instant.
Sure.
So if somebody's really not functioning, generally we will send them to a psychiatrist. If somebody is suicidal, of course, we're going to send them to a psychiatrist, if not to a hospital, depending on how severe the situation is. But on the other hand, if somebody is describing something that's more mild, maybe hasn't been going on that long, is not affecting their life in a terrible way, it's affecting them obviously at some point, otherwise they wouldn't be calling us, then therapy is often going to be the first route.
Gotcha. So there could be, let's say we were going to create a pie chart of why people call. Are there hundreds of different reasons from a broad perspective? Are there hundreds of different reasons? Is it mostly trauma? Is it different in nature? How would you categorize the pie chart? So
unlike medicine, where there are literally thousands of disorders, in mental health, although there's a very thick book called the DSM, which is Diagnostic Statistical Manual of all the disorders, in reality, for the most part, we're dealing with maybe 2 or 3 dozen disorders. The most prevalent is going to be, of course, is probably no surprise, is anxiety. Anxiety is the number 1. Depression is number 2. And then 1,000,001 things, from OCD, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, trauma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So anxiety and depression, is that immediately a track to a psychiatrist and medication, or it can go either way? So
it could go either way, again, depending on how severe. It's interesting, in statistics that are out there, depression is number 1 and anxiety is number 2. In our statistics, anxiety is number 1 and depression is number 2. And the reason for that...
And hour means...
Hour relief.
In relief,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And the reason for that is probably because when somebody has depression, they could be stuck in their depression for a long time. They could really be in a rut, and unless somebody's pulling them out, a spouse, a parent, a very close friend, they could really be stuck in that rut for a long time. Whereas anxiety, they're jumping out of their skin. So they're more likely to call for help. Okay, so therefore, that's why we're seeing more anxiety than we're seeing depression.
Oh, interesting. People that are depressed are
right.
lonely. They're not necessarily reaching out.
Forgetting to get the help. But again, depending on how severe the situation is, the treatment, the number 1 treatment for anxiety is therapy. Okay, and generally cognitive behavioral therapy, a certain type of therapy. Medicines can help, and medicines often are good to take that edge off and have the therapy work faster. Depression can go either way. Depression, depending on the situation, can either medicine, therapy, or sometimes both. And really, for both anxiety and depression, often both are going to be used, both medicine and therapy.
And Relief's been at this for how long now?
So Relief has been around for about 20 years.
Okay.
And I've been with Relief for 19 years.
Where would you say the state of mental health is today versus where it was 20 years ago?
So it's definitely changed, in terms of awareness. There's no question. People are talking about these type of issues in a way that when we started, nobody was talking about.
It was almost frowned upon to...
Yeah, it was very much under the rug and not talked about. But and we're not taking credit for it. I think it's a lot of things are going on. There's certainly other organizations that are talking about all these issues, and so that's people are coming out and getting help.
And would you say that the older generation, is it because the younger generation is getting older and they don't have that stigma? Because if you talk to people in their 50s, 60s, 70s that grew up in a very binary state where it's either black or white, right? Mm-hmm. You're either crazy or you don't need a psychiatrist. Whereas the younger generation looks at it the same way you need an Advil for your knee that's in pain, you can take some sort of medication to help you deal with anxiousness. Is the older generation come around on that, or there's still a clear divide?
There's a pretty clear divide. Statistically, only about 4 or 5% of what we deal with is above the age of 65. Now, part of that is because many of the disorders that we deal with really are, develop in early life, in teenage years or early 20s. So that's just because of the nature of what we're dealing with. But certainly, you're 100% right that with the older generation, it wasn't part of life. People didn't do that. They didn't go to therapy. Whereas, in today's generation, I was speaking to somebody who was telling me that her daughter was going to trailers, for being pulled out of class for trailers, special ed, and the daughter cried to the mother. She goes, "Why can't I go to therapy like all my friends?" Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So today it's a different world. It's a different world.
They're eager for it.
Yeah.
Are mental health issues more prevalent, and that's why it's more discussed, or was the previous generation just more content and they didn't have as many issues, or it really indeed 50 years ago was just swept under the rug?
So it's a question that comes up very, very often, and I don't pretend to know the answers to everything, but I think that it's not just one answer. I think there are a couple of things in play. Number one is math.
Okay.
Baruch Hashem, the Frum community has grown tremendously. I saw a statistic recently that in the last 25 years, the Frum community quadrupled, right? Which, if you think about your own family, it makes sense to say that. So then something that was 2% of the population 50 years ago was a small number. Today, 2% of the population is a big number. So say something like bipolar disorder, which affects 1 or 2% of the population, you're dealing with a much bigger number than we were dealing with, even when Relief started. So that's one piece of it, and that's a significant piece. The second thing is, like we said before, awareness. There's no question that people who were having troubles many, many years ago, if somebody was had some serious mental health issues, often it was blamed on the war, right? They ran through the war, right? Today, people are really looking at their issues and really getting the help that they need. So that's the second reason. I think the third factor that we're seeing is that as much as we are a separate society, at the end of the day, there are things that are seeping into our society as well. We're seeing addictions in numbers that we never saw before. So that's certainly, I think, one of the biggest areas that we're seeing, unfortunately, a very, very, significant growth. So when you put all these things together, that's I think, some of the reasons why we're seeing such numbers.
So this being a money-focused podcast, the reason we wanted you to come in today is just to share a little bit of light into how much does wealth or finances play into anxieties, right? When you think about, it's possible that it's not all that much, but when it comes to Relief phone calls in, how much of the issues that people bring up are related to money, their personal finance situations?
So finances and mental health are really very, very closely related. In fact, one of the first experiences that I had with mental health was before Relief even existed. Was when I was working as the director of PCS, of the Good as Jobs program. And there was a guy who came in for a job, and we got him a job. And then 6 weeks later, he was back because he got fired, and he needed another job. And then basically this was going on for every 6 weeks to 2 months. He was back looking for another job. And so one of the board members said, this guy doesn't need a job. He needs a therapist. Okay. And he says, I have a friend who's a therapist. And I'm going to tell him to say that he's a job coach. Okay. Because in those days, nobody was going to therapy. I'm going to say, tell him you're a job coach, and I'm going to send him to him, and I'm going to pay for it. And that's what he did. He went to this therapist, and he kept the next job for 20 years till the company closed down. So, that was really my first, opportunity to see that, mental health and finances really go very, very closely together, because if somebody is not stable, and even, not in a way that's so obvious to everybody, but, a good bit of anxiety could, really get in the way of the work that you're doing. So all these things definitely play a role in, somebody's financial stability.
So wealthy people, right? You would think that they aren't struggling with mental health, but that's completely wrong, right?
Correct. So the one thing about mental health is that it doesn't discriminate. Poor people are dealing with it. Middle-class people are dealing with it. Wealthy people are dealing with it. Each one has their own, struggles and their own unique circumstances. I remember once hearing from Shmuel Birnbaum, Zechron Levracha, that he said he felt particularly bad for a rich person who was depressed. Because a poor person who's depressed could say, okay, maybe one day I'll be rich. Okay. But a rich
that's the answer, right?
Right. But a rich person depressed, what's he looking forward to? So that's, again, it really cuts across, all socioeconomic, status. But I think what we sometimes think about, that when we hear about rich people or famous people that are having this, that it maybe affects them even more than it affects other people. And probably the answer is no. It really probably doesn't. It's just that they're famous, so therefore it's going to stand out more. You may not know that your neighbor is dealing with whatever he's dealing with. So it's interesting. It really does cut across all levels.
But I would imagine that wealthy people are dealing with different anxieties and different types of depression than someone who's poor, right?
Right.
Or doesn't have the money.
So again, it's interesting. There's we find that there are two groups of people that have a difficult time in getting good treatment: the very poor and the very wealthy. Now, the very poor is obvious,
right?
Because they can't afford good care, so they may have to go to a clinic, they may have to get substandard care. So you understand why they would get poor treatment. But the very wealthy, why would they get substandard treatment? And the answer is they're not used to waiting. And they're not used to, say somebody has a business, right? Okay. And he's a successful businessman. And in his company, when he says jump, people say how high, right? And he's used to that.
Right.
And then comes something like mental health, into play. And it's taking longer than he would want it to take, right? So somebody in his family had, let's say, for example, a manic episode, and I have this all the time. And, a week passes, 2 weeks passes, 3 weeks passes. Well, why aren't they better yet? So maybe I should, the doctor that I'm dealing with, maybe he's not good enough. Maybe I need a bigger doctor, a different doctor. And so the $700, $800, $900, $1,000, evaluation that would stop the regular person from jumping, because they say, well, I don't have that kind of money, so let's see if this is going to work.
Right.
They don't have that holding them back. And what ends up happening is that they jump too quickly, and they don't really let things work, and then it just becomes very, very confusing.
Right. A rich person can't tell his anxiety to jump. It's not going to say, how far away do you want me to go?
Exactly.
It's going to take some time.
Right.
Wow. Because you would think that the wealthy people with the access to it, they would be cured more quickly.
Right.
But it's not necessarily the case. Have you ever dealt with someone who came into a lot of money really quickly and it sort of like threw them off? Because I always say that if I was to win the lottery, and we discussed this with Reb Naftali Horowitz, how we wouldn't know who our friends are, and it would completely change the whole dynamic of our life. But there are tremendous amount of anxieties that come with an abundance of wealth, right? Will I retain the wealth, etc.? Does that come into play?
Absolutely does. We were once dealing with a very, very wealthy person, and we needed a certain favor not from him, but from a friend of his. And I was speaking to somebody, who I asked him to speak to this person. He said he'll never ask for a favor because he doesn't know if he has any friends.
Wow.
Okay. And that was, to me, it was such a sad thing. This is a person who's really on top of the world. But because of his wealth, he doesn't know who his friends are.
Wow. And now a word from our sponsor. You see all that thank you Hashem swag running around town in the U.S., overseas? That's because they got their swag from FAO Printing. Now, FAO Printing, good friend of the podcast, huge fan, run by Pinny Fisher. If your business needs swag, you got to look up FAO Printing. They do caps, sweatshirts, all types of promo items for your business. And they not only do it at a great price, but they care. So if you get a cap, one of your caps, it's a little off, they'll take care of it. They want to make sure you have an excellent product. I got sweatshirts for my business from them. I got caps. And it's not those junky caps that you see running around. They're quality, right? I think part of why Thank You Hashem swag has gotten where it's gotten is because the quality and the quality of those products is golden. So hit them up. Tell them the guys at Kosher Money sent you. Pinny, Pinny, at FAOprinting.com. They ship cross-country. So you're in New York, California. You own nursing homes. You own a small mom-and-pop shop. Whatever it is, hit them up. Tell them Kosher Money sent you. Maybe they'll give you a Kosher Money discount. Pinny at FAOprinting.com. You can also call them, leave a message. They'll call you back, 718-282-3310. Tell them your boys at Kosher Money sent you, FAO Printing. Now back to the podcast. So from the little I know about psychiatrists, or at least the good ones, they tend to stay away from insurance, right? And I've heard the reason, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if they were to go through insurance, there would be a delay in them getting paid via the insurance company or whatnot. You know, it's cash, it's direct. Does that sort of hurt the less wealthy or the people that may not have the monies that they're going to possibly subpar psychiatrists? And what's the answer there?
Right. So it's a very, very big problem, and it's something we deal with every day. Doctors don't take insurance because, and it's everybody's fault. Okay. If somebody breaks their leg, you take an x-ray, you see the leg is broken, put on a cast, 6 weeks later, you take another x-ray, leg is fixed, we're done.
Right.
Okay. It's very clear. Insurance company will pay for that. No problem. Okay. Because mental health is such a gray area, the insurance companies know that if they say, okay, we're going to cover this person for 2 years of treatment, there's going to be a clinician out there who's going to say, this guy needs 2 years of treatment. Okay. So it's a game that the insurance companies don't really want to cover because they know that they're going to be taken for a ride. And because there are some clinicians out there who are less than honest, what ends up happening is that they create all kinds of barriers, really. A lot of paperwork, denials. Like you're saying, they don't get paid right away. Certainly, they pay at a lower level than the person can charge privately. So what happens is that the good clinicians will say, "I'm not taking insurance. Why do I need this? I have a full practice anyway."
Right.
So yeah, it definitely does hurt those people who need it. Now we have a couple ways of dealing with that. One way is, again, when we're dealing with something that's more mild, hasn't been going on for so long, there are times where you could use the clinics, and we definitely make use of clinics where people can use their insurance. And in some clinics, depending on the clinic, some clinics where we have a relationship with the clinic, the people who run the clinic, we say, listen, this person needs a higher level. Please make sure that they get this therapist or that therapist. So that's on one level. The second thing is insurance. So as we said, insurance, the insurance, most people have coverage for mental health, but you can't find anybody that accepts your coverage.
Uh-huh.
However, if you can prove to the insurance company that they don't have in-network what you need, they must pay out-of-network even if you don't have out-of-network benefits.
How do you prove that?
So most people don't know this.
Yeah.
As a rule, they don't know it. But even if you did know it,
this sounds like a Kosher Money blast, Yaakov. I think when this comes on the camera, we should have something like boom. Yeah, go for it.
But again, even if you did know this, how do you know how to fight your insurance company? And you don't have the head to fight your insurance company if you're dealing with a mental health issue. So we have a company that we work with. We contract out with a company, a very, very good bunch of Chassidish guys who are really good at this. And they fight your insurance company, and we pay for it.
We as in relief.
We as in relief, yeah. Because it's the best return on investment you ever saw in your life. The average case costs us maybe $400, $500, and the average winnings for the client could be anywhere from 5,000 to we even had 100,000.
Wow.
Okay. Now, this doesn't work for everything. This doesn't work for your garden variety anxiety, because for that, the insurance company will say, go to the clinic.
Right.
But for certain things that are more difficult, eating disorders, personality disorders, where the insurance company knows that if they don't cover treatment, they're going to end up paying for hospitalization, which is going to be much, much more expensive. So it's easy to fight them on those things.
Sort of back them into a corner there.
Right. Sometimes language, let's say, for example, you have a Yiddish-speaking kid, right? He needs a clinician who speaks Yiddish. He's not going to be able to do it otherwise. Sometimes you could do that. There are different things that you could do. Again, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't work for every case, but when it does work, it really works very, very well. And then I probably shouldn't say this on a podcast that's going to be listened to by dozens of people. But there is a fund that we administer of a few $100,000. It's only a drop in the bucket. And we don't tell people about it, because if we did, we'd need millions of dollars. But when all else fails, we do try to help people pay. Now, this also is fascinating, how sometimes all we need to do is prime the pump. Okay, what do I mean? So let's say there was a person I was dealing with. He had bipolar disorder, and he was doing very poorly. And it was very obvious to us why he was doing poorly. He was doing poorly because he was seeing a very, very substandard clinician. So I said to him, listen, you've been with the clinician for a while. It's not helping you. I would recommend you see Dr. So-and-so. Dr. So-and-so charges $700 for the first visit. She says, $700? I don't have $700. Now, I know what he's thinking. He's thinking, what's the difference between the doctor I'm seeing and the doctor you're giving me? And I don't have $700, right? So what we do sometimes in that situation, we say, listen, we'll do 400, you do 300. Could you do that? 300 I could do, okay? And then they go to the doctor, and then they come back and they say, now that's a doctor. Now I get it. Now I have what you're talking about.
The second visit, $1,400?
No, so the second visit is usually, the follow-up visits are more manageable. They're, again, depending on the doctor, it could be 250, 275, 300.
Right.
But again, those are and depending on how often the psychiatrist, you don't necessarily have to see that often, right? You can spread out the visits sometimes, again, if it's not so severe. So sometimes just a few $100s could get them on the right track. So, we stretch out this money, as much as we can.
That's awesome. So with COVID, and obviously in the rearview mirror, did careers and jobs that were, people lost them, people had jobs for dozens of years, they lost them. Did calls coming into relief relate to that, right? What was relief like during COVID? Did calls increase, and how much of that was related to finances?
So it's interesting. We know our pattern is that when the crisis is going on, we're going to get less calls. There are, Baruch Hashem, wonderful organizations out there that deal with crisis, and they get the crisis calls, right? We get the calls 3 months later.
And to clarify, a crisis call means someone needs help right there.
Yeah. So let's take for example what happened in Meron.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the initial, although we were involved on some level, but the initial crisis, the initial dealing with the tragedy and the trauma on site, that was handled very, very nicely by wonderful organizations. We're going to get these calls. We're going to get the people after 3 months who haven't gotten over it, who are still having the nightmares, who are still, right? So the same thing was with during Corona, during the, when everybody was hunkered down, it was actually very quiet. And we knew that we were going to get inundated afterwards. And boy, did we. We're over 30% above what we were before.
Yeah. People that had direct impact as a result, or just people that were exposed to seeing video or hearing about it?
So really, it's across the board. Certainly we had a lot of grief and bereavement issues that we had to deal with. Some very complicated ones. Kahlo got married, and one of these backyard weddings, and her father got corona and died 2 weeks later. These type of terrible stories. But also a lot of anxiety, a lot of health anxiety, people who survived but were really shaken up big time. Financial, more at the beginning. That we were seeing more at the beginning when people were really worried about what's going to be. But at some point, things kind of settled out, and so that kind of dissipated. So I think probably at the beginning we saw more of the financial concerns.
And speaking about financial concerns as it pertains to a family, do you get calls about a husband and a wife that may not be necessarily getting along when it relates to finances, to kids, or even relief aside? I'm sure there are many couples that argue over finances, and what do you recommend to them to sort of bridge the gap?
Good therapy.
Good therapy.
But no, listen, we certainly get a lot of a lot of couples that finances are an issue. I would say actually, just giving it a little bit of thought, probably one of the most common financial related shalom bias issues that we see are when there's a control issue over the finances, where usually the husband is very, very controlling over the finances, and that's creating a lot of problems. I would say that in general, most of the shalom bias issues we see are for a variety of reasons, including mental health issues. But if we're going to look at the financial ones, I think that's probably the biggest area that we see.
Yeah, I was shared a stat here related to mental health and money, and it says that half of people, 46% of people in debt also have a mental health problem. Whereas you would think, oh, okay, give them some tzedakah and they'll get better, but it's really stemming from a bigger issue, right?
Right. So again, if we're talking about, and again, at Relief, we are talking about regular, everyday people. Obviously somebody with severe, persistent, chronic mental health is going to have serious, financial problems because they're not able to have a job. But that's a very small percentage. That's probably less than 2%, maybe even 1% of what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with, the other 99% are guys like me and you, okay? Regular people who are going through regular life but have whatever is going on. So, and again, like I mentioned before, your stability, being able to keep a job, do well at the job, is going to be affected by your mental health, right? So as an example, I had a situation a number of years back where a guy, a father of 10 kids, who's a Rebbe, very, very popular Rebbe, very successful Rebbe, went into a very, very deep depression, very serious deep depression. And, he's in bed, and he had a daughter in seminary, he had kids in shidduchim, tuition to pay. He wasn't working, right? A disaster. Baruch Hashem, we were able to get him to a very, very good doctor, and ended up getting something called ECT, if you're familiar with that. It's an electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy, which is only used in the most severe situations, but his was pretty severe. And he did great. And he got back to work, got his job back, and the family was saved here. It's not, when you look at, of course we helped this individual, but the kids that got married, Baruch Hashem, because there was somebody to be able to pay for the wedding, right? So when you're dealing with mental health, the ripple effect of good mental health goes, it goes very, very far. Again, it deals, you're not just dealing with the individual, you're dealing with the family, and you're not just dealing with the family, you're dealing with generations.
Right. So you fix one, you fix many.
Right.
I've spoken to people where they say, yes, I am anxious, whether it's about my finances, whether it's about my children, and you can tell that it's not realistic anxiousness, right? I'm sure there's a certain level of healthy anxiety. You don't want to eliminate that and have someone be laissez-faire, but what do you tell those people that, hey, I don't want to have to rely on going to someone to ensure that I'm okay, or I don't want to have to rely on a medication, even though it probably could help me, because then I'm reliant on something else. I want to man up, and I want to, just sort of swallow it and move on.
So the answer is, if you can, great. But most people can't. Most people can't do it themselves for a variety of reasons, but it's really hard to do yourself. And we tell people that if you have anxiety, whether it's financial or any type of anxiety, and it's stopping you from really being part of life in its fullest form, it's a shame. It's baltashkas not to take care of it, because anxiety is very treatable. And if you get the right help, there's no reason to suffer. So again, if somebody's thinking all day long about, whether they're going to have enough money to marry off their kids, or they're going to have enough money to retire, or whatever their anxiety is based on, it just eats up your life. And it's a shame to do that.
So for those listening that are somewhat on the fence, and you're sort of opening their eyes now, how long is the treatment plan, right? If someone does have low levels of anxiety, but they know that they should either speak to someone, a therapist, psychiatrist, are they in it for 4.5 years, or no? They'd be surprised at just how quickly they can get into a chair. Like everyone thinks you're laying on a couch.
Okay.
That's not true, right?
They've done it only on the west side.
Only on the west side, fancy leather couches. But is it realistic to say, okay, they're going to call Relief within a week or two? What's the timeline here? Walk us through that.
So unfortunately, right now, because of the volume that we're dealing with, it does take a little bit of time to get through to Relief. And I always tell people that, we're believe me, we're trying to get back to everybody as quickly as possible, but we do give everybody the time that they need, and that's why it does take us time. But once we get to you, we'll give you, as much time as you need. And then the question is, what type of help they need going forward. Whether they need a psychiatrist, psychologist. But let's take a simple case of anxiety, and let's say it's really simple, right? It hasn't been going on for that long. It's not like it's going on for 10 years. And the person is motivated to take care of the problem. We tell people generally 3 to 6 months of good therapy, it'll be good. Now, it's very, very hard to give this kind of number because there are so many different variables and there's so many different ranges of issues. And sometimes you start out with an anxiety problem and you end up with something entirely different. But let's say, again, if it's a simple anxiety, certainly, and a motivated person and a good therapist, you put those ingredients together, you can put this to bed very, very quickly.
And how much of this is hereditary? Anxiety, if I have anxiousness towards my career, wealth, other things, does that mean my kids are more prone to have it?
So it seems, according to conventional wisdom, it seems that anxiety is genetic, but there's not a family in Klal Yisrael that doesn't have the genes for anxiety. So we're all in that boat.
We were born. We were made for this.
Yes, we're all made for that. Some of the other things, is different. Some of the more serious disorders are less prevalent, but anxiety is who doesn't have anxiety?
Right. I mean, so they say marba nechas and marba daigim, right? The more you have, the more worries you have. Do you see a real correlation when it comes to that? So,
again, you definitely see that somebody who is, wealthier has more to worry about, right? They have their financial issues, they have their social status. There are definitely going to be more things for them to worry about. So that's why I think where the marba nechas and marba daigim comes from. Because if you don't have anything, okay, what do I have to lose?
Right.
But when you do have what to lose, it keeps you up at night.
That's right. So what if someone didn't feel the need or did go to a therapist and they've brought the levels of stress and anxiety down, but not completely, but they want some manageable tips along the way, and I don't believe you're a psychiatrist by any means, so this is not advice from a doctor, but over the years I'm sure you've seen certain things. How do you help people cope with the stresses and anxieties related to their job? Right? Everyone has to wake up. It's hard, right? I always say growing up, we never realized, you always hear, oh, you're in camp, you're in yeshiva. These are the best years of your life. You're looking at them, what? You're crazy. I can't wait till I have a job and no teacher looking down my back. But there are stresses and anxieties that come along with it. And the finances of a personal Jew tends to differ than those in middle America. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of beautiful goodness to this life, and we love it. But how do you help people manage that?
So the truth is, I don't, because I'm not a professional. And I don't give that type of advice. This is just advice from just a regular guy. It could be your neighbor. But my personal view on money, which doesn't work for everybody, is I really try very hard to believe that whatever I have, and if I need it, I'm going to have it, and if I don't have it, I don't need it. But again, I was never tested with the Nisayon of wealth. I saw once a very beautiful thing. It says in Pirkei Avos, so it says Vyesi ben Kisma, right, was traveling, and somebody offered him to move to their town, and he said, I want to live in a place of Torah. No matter how much money you pay me, I'm not coming. And the Mishnah goes on to say, as it says in Tehillim that was written by David Melech Yisrael, Tovli Torah Spicha, Ma'afei Zav V'Kesef, Torah is more important than the money. So I once saw very beautiful. It says, why does it say that it was written in Tehillim that was written by David Melech Yisrael? Everybody knows who Tehillim was written by. We have David Melech Yisrael, and written by David HaMelech. What's this long title, David Melech Yisrael? So somebody who says money is not important, right? If he has no money, big deal. Who are you to say money is important? You don't know what you're talking about, right? If you're David Melech Yisrael and you say money is not important, that means something. So that's what I'm saying. I was never tested with the Nisayon of wealth. Baruch Hashem, not of poverty either, but somewhere in the middle. So I can't really talk too big about this, and therefore I don't really give advice. But that's my own personal view.
No, that certainly has been a common theme. We spoke with Naftali Horowitz. We spoke with Zevi Woolman or Moshe Hauer, where if anyone has come to this podcast thinking that money is going to solve all of their issues, they're not aware that that's not true, and money will bring a host of other issues along the way.
I often say that the problems, at least in the relief, the problems that too little money create are very easy to fix. The problems that too much money creates are very hard to fix. Very hard.
Do you see are there gambling issues that people have, and how they come to relief and they say, hey, I need help?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely one of the things out there. Unfortunately, we've seen people that lost. I just had somebody I've dealt with lost millions in gambling. And then there are people who lose millions in different type of gambling. They take risks in business that they shouldn't be taking, which is also, it's a different type of gambling.
And those stem from possibly mental health related issues?
A lot of times, not always. Again, one of the signs and symptoms of a manic episode is grandiose thinking and spending like crazy. And so there was a case I dealt with of a woman who bought a house in a day. Okay. And she could kind of afford it, but it was still a little bit,
that's a big purchase, right?
Yeah,
for me, a big purchase is
that's a big purchase to
getting
make
an extra egg sandwich one day.
Exactly,
right.
To make in one day, without really thinking about it. And we've had, again, people who during a manic episode are they get lucky and they can make a lot of money because they're super, they're juiced up. But then in the end they crash. And then a lot of times, I had a situation like that where somebody was making a tremendous amount of money during the manic episode, and then in the end, everything got lost.
Wow.
And that's almost worse than not having it to begin with.
When you look at today's generation and the amount of wealth, right? There are families that are very wealthy, or even the average family. Inflation included, there's more wealth than there was X amount of years ago. Is that a correlation with why there are more mental health issues today?
So we're definitely seeing, like I said before, many more issues. And one of the things that people would think is that since today we are so much better off than our parents and grandparents were in the shtetl, right? We should be living it up. But yet you find that the numbers of cases of anxiety are going through the roof. So how does that make sense? So I once heard this from Lchaim Epstein, Zochron Levracha. He said he once came down to the breakfast table and he saw one of his grandchildren sitting at the table, and they had 5 boxes of cereal in front of them, and they were like deep in thought. He said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I don't know which one to choose." So he says, "That's the problem, because when I was a kid, it was either Rice Krispies or cornflakes. That was it." Okay.
Sounds like my mother, by the way. Right. Yeah. Too much to choose.
But that's what it is. The amount of choices that we have for everything actually creates a lot of anxiety. So I once saw a study that was done that the 3 most anxiety-provoking things in life are death of a spouse, divorce, and building a house. Now, the first 2 are very easy to understand.
Sure.
But why building a house? Because you have so many options. Should we do porcelain tile, ceramic tile, carpet, wood floors, this type of doorknob, that type of doorknob? You can go crazy from the decisions, and that creates a lot of anxiety.
I've seen the before and afters of people before they built the house, and afters they're much more gray. They need to go on vacation after they build a beautiful house, right? Now go live in it. No, I need to get away.
Right.
So there are certainly daigas that come along with that. What would you recommend parents instill in their children to A, better cope with anxieties, and B, how do you identify that, hey, I have a kid that needs some sort of help versus it's just a kid being a kid?
Right. So again, this is an area in terms of how I recommend people take care of their kids' anxieties. Again, something I don't do, but let's say with my own children, teaching coping skills is very, very important. I think probably one of the biggest problems that many people will say they see in today's generation, the younger generation especially, is that they did not get good coping skills from us parents, and parents are afraid to say no to their kids. And they're afraid to, and they don't like hearing no for themselves. So that is a big issue. Teaching coping skills to kids is really, really important, and that is probably the best thing you could do for them. That's going to last them throughout their life.
So saying no is healthy.
Yeah. So saying no is definitely healthy. Now, again, every situation is different, and I'm not giving chinuch advice, that's for sure. But teaching coping skills and teaching children how to deal with things not going their way is a very, very important tool for life.
So What would be your, if you were to part with, there's someone listening and they were, they decided that they're thinking about calling relief. It's all confidential, right?
Absolutely.
No one will know or whatnot.
No, you can be completely anonymous.
And your advice to them.
So my advice to people is that there's really help out there, and there's very good help out there. Like I said before, it's a shame not to get the help, because you're just going through life suffering and creating issues. Not these like I said, just like the help is not just for the individuals, for the family, it's for generations. The problem very often spreads to the family and to the generations. So it's really, it's very important to get the help and know that there is very, very good help out there.
And how do they reach you? What's the best way?
The best way is
your personal cell phone? I'm sure, right?
Either the main number, which is 718-431-9501. But probably the best thing, it depends, because we have offices around the country and around the world.
Okay.
So I assume that this podcast will be listened to for people far
by
and wide.
dozens across the world as well.
Across the fruit plain. So the best thing is to go to the website, which is reliefhelp.org, reliefhelp.org.
Great. We'll put it in the show notes. Rabbi Babad, thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll see you next time. And there you have it. Another fantastic episode in the books. When it comes to mental health and you want to help my mental health, leave a review. A 5-star review really helps us. So if you have an iPhone, open up the podcast app, search Kosher Money, hit the 5 stars, write a review. If you have any feedback for us, bring it on. info@livingsmarterjewish.org in terms of guests, people you want to see. If you did not get that budgeting Excel worksheet, highly recommend you do it. It will really help you quantify exactly where your money's going on a monthly basis. It's a great first step. So email Zevi at info@livingsmarterjewish.org. Again, info@livingsmarterjewish.org. Ask for the budgeting worksheet. This episode was sponsored by FAOprinting.com. Again, if you want fly swag for your business, check them out. Email them Pinny, Pinny @FAOprinting.com. They do everything, right? I mean, I've gotten caps, sweatshirts, promo items, out-of-the-box promo items, great prices, great turnaround, super responsive, really like that. You can call them 718-282-3310. If they don't pick up because you're listening to this at 2 a.m., God bless you. Leave a message. They'll get back to you pretty quickly. Tell Pinny I say hello, as my brother Yaakov, you send regards to? Yeah, both of us actually send regards to Pinny. And Yaakov is also spearheading Living Lchaim. So check them out on YouTube. Subscribe there. Leave us a review. Until next time, keep your money kosher.
This podcast has been hosted by my brother, Eli Langer, produced by me, Yaakov Langer, and brought to you by Living Lchaim. To check out other podcasts from Living Lchaim, go to livinglchaim.com. Check out our YouTube channel. Check up Living Lchaim on podcasts, and do your thing. Until next time, enjoy life. Living Lchaim.